Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
Solicitor by day, away from his busy profession, a keen artist who turned a passion into a reality. From a boyhood love of reading comics to a desire to create stories, imaginary characters, and bring to life his own comic. My guest decided to embark on a creative journey, self-funding and establishing his own crowdfunding page to create a comic book series. Under the name Proper PC Comics, my guest was heavily influenced by comic book illustrators Jack Davis, Will Eisner, and Wally Wood. His Mary Boys comics have an authentic look and style, utilising real media with the narratives representing jet black British humour. My guest is also the author of a published graphic novel called Sparko. Today's Your Take guest is Karl Stephan, who will no doubt educate me into the universe of comic book creation. We discuss Karl's upbringing in his native country of South Africa, moving to the United Kingdom, a career in the law profession, a lifelong passion in reading and collecting comics, his creative flair, and the work involved in creating and distributing his comic book creation, Mary Boys. A very warm welcome, Karl, a fellow Bristolian as well, Bristol resident.
By extension. Yeah.
By extension, indeed. Thanks for being a guest on Your Take. The introduction alone on this evening's interview, we're obviously going to cover many areas, from your early life in South Africa to your love and passion for creativity, illustrations, and the main focal point, creating your own comic. But I always like to kind of take the kind of biographical journey and go back to the very beginnings, because an interesting early life. But can I ask you when and where you were born? And can you just describe and give us some background on your parents, what they did for a living? And do you have siblings?
Yeah, I was born in the early 80s in South Africa. It was basically out in the bushveld, quite literally. My father was a civil engineer, and he did well. And during that particular time when I was really young, my first memories of where we lived, it was out in a prefabricated house out near a battle school. So he was helping build infrastructure for that battle school. My earliest memories were, literally running around in the bushveld, jungle, what have you, with Impala fighter jets flying overhead, tanks, people carriers, stuff like that. So it was I got a really, it's kind of weird. The rest of your life just doesn't live up to that experience that you had right in the beginning. Like a boy's dream, really. So what was the other thing? My parents. Yeah, so my father was a civil engineer. My mom was a housewife. She painted. She was very good at painting, to be honest with you. Nothing like, not comic books or anything, like oil paintings of. She really liked drawing mountains, flowers, things like outside scenes and scenery and whatever. No formal training whatsoever, but she was quite good. And I think that kind of rubbed off on me. Siblings. I've got a sibling who works in film. She's a principal photographer on a few well-known TV series. And she flies all over the place, does all sorts of projects, and that's it. Yeah.
From a childhood in South Africa, and you've given us some background that you came from a creative family. I want to move on and touch upon your education, because I always like to focus on one's education as part of the interview. And I want to ask you where you were schooled and were you academic, and what subjects were you interested in? And would you say you had a creative flair from an early age?
Creative flair. Yeah, I could draw since I can remember, pretty much. I never studied art, and I never took art at school, really. I think I had, like, art classes until I was about 12 or something. And after that, didn't really continue with it. So yeah, no formal arts education. It's mostly just self-taught stuff from reading books, watching videos, things like that. My education is obviously in law. Well, I guess we'll get to that. But yeah, I went to you guys in the UK, it confuses the hell out of me because you guys say public school, where it's not really for the public.
Right.
So I went to the equivalent of a state school back in South Africa. Not to confuse English listeners, but yeah, just general run-of-the-mill education. After school, I went to university and studied law. That's basically it. Yeah.
We'll talk about your tenure at law school, because you finished your education, you went on eventually to university, and to focus your attention on working in the legal profession. What made you decide to make that your career choice? And what made you decide to specialize in commercial property? And also, can you discuss the reasons for moving to the UK?
All right. Well, law. I don't know. I don't know. It's like I think, like, when I was a kid, there was a TV series called LA Law, right?
Yeah, I remember
They
it
were
very, very well.
Yeah, and they were buzzing
Yeah.
around in their expensive cars, talking on phones, office politics. It wasn't nothing to do with law, nothing at all. It was just, and I don't know, it just stuck in my mind because everyone in my class said, "I want to be a lawyer," and I didn't want to think about it. I think I was terrified of growing up. I didn't want to think about the future at all. So I just parroted the same sort of refrain. I wanted to do it. I just didn't change it. And then my parents cottoned on to this. So, hey, that's a pretty good idea. And they kind of pushed me into that. They didn't want me to study art because it's a dead end career, according to some people. I don't think it is, but yeah, just went with the flow. It's basically my inactivity that landed me in the path to law. Because before I knew it, the 5 years were up. I'd done my degree and my post degree and all that, and yeah, I got a training contract. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to specialize in. I did some litigation, and didn't really enjoy it. And then it kind of ties into why I went to the UK, because there was a visa scheme that South Africans could apply for. You could get a 12-month working holiday visa to come over and do things like picking fruit and whatever, And I thought that sounds like a lot of fun. Before I get stuck into this legal career, I'd like to just see a bit of the world. I've always loved England. I love British comedy. Comic books. I just love the old 2000 AD Judge Dredd. I thought this sounds great. I'd rather do that than go to the States. I don't think there was a visa scheme for the States anyway. So, long story short, I came over, met a nice girl, and she's Polish. And she wasn't going to move back to South Africa, so I stayed here. It was almost like the middle ground for both of us. So yeah, just and that's the end of it, pretty much.
We've spoken about your origins in South Africa. You've given us a portrait about your parents, who they were, and kind of the things you did, playing in kind of a fictitious world. And you've spoken about your law background, your time at university as well. I want to tap into the creative side, and specifically comics and that imaginary world, and why you were fascinated specifically by the comic book. And I wanted to ask you, at what age were you buying and collecting comics? What comics were your favorites and why? And what is it about the concept, design, and the aesthetic of a comic book that ultimately made you decide to eventually produce your own?
Yeah, it's a weird one. See, when I was running around in the bush in South Africa, when I was small, my dad used to bring back You know, we got TV very late. I might add. You know, South Africa only got TV back in the late 70s. You know, so and it was very limited programming. So, you know, it was mostly things that you could, that's where there was your forms of entertainment. There was the newspaper, there was the radio, and there were these comic books that my dad just brought back, you know. So I was poring over these old you used to get these collected Mad magazines, these cartoons, and they were non-verbal, you know. So this was before I could read. I remember I must have been about 4. I found one of these, and you can, you know, the cartooning is so good, you can tell what it's about without there being any dialogue. And I was poring over that from a young age. I just loved it. So I'd say that's probably the first sort of encounter. My dad, he liked Asterix and, you know, Asterix and Obelix and Tintin, Papa, Lucky Luke, those old European translated comics. So that was like the next sort of thing. I didn't even think I could read back then. I just loved the pictures. I loved the art, and just sporadic, just getting exposed to it throughout the years. It's just weird. It's almost like walking. You know, your consciousness is like, it's like walking along a beach. That's your life, and your consciousness is just it's just that two handfuls of sand that you pick up out of that entire world. So I guess I kind of gravitated towards, you know, this visual medium. You know, there's something in me, I guess, that just really latched onto while other kids were playing a lot of sport and, you know, got excited about, you know, cars and, you know, stuff like that. I just latched onto comic books. So
You've cited some interesting influences and inspirations that many of us of a certain generation and with similar sort of age can tap into, with a love of Tintin as a comic book and also transferred into a cartoon, and Asterix the same as well. You cited those kind of childhood influences, and I want to come on to your admiration for some key illustrators in the comic book world. And I cite the names of Jack Davis, Will Eisner and Wally Wood, you've cited as inspirations. What makes those particular illustrators and comic book creators, why are they so special to you, and why have they been a huge influence?
It's just, I don't know. I think it's, well, those are all illustrators that started out in EC Comics. In the 1950s, there were a line of war, crime, suspense, and horror stories published by a publisher called EC Comics. And they went out of business in the 1950s because of a big moral panic, outrage, because everything was so gory and, you know, it was influencing kids negatively. I love that stuff. It was reprinted subsequently when I was a teenager, and I just fell in love with that. The level of illustration was just to me, it was just a few bars higher to anything else that was out there at the time. You know, it was just amazing work, and I really latched onto it. Very good. It was the era of pen and ink and brush illustration without having to rely on it was colored, but it had to work in black and white, and there were the textures, the line work. It's just absolutely beautiful. And those were some of the best guys to have ever worked, I think, in a medium, and they went on to do greater things too. Well, Jack Davis, anyway, he was probably one of the most recognizable illustrators in the States for decades, because he started doing advertising after that. So there was a little bit of him all over the place. Everybody recognized that style, a very cartoony, sort of big-footed, weird, humorous sort of illustration. But he was also really good at doing horror, which I really love. Yeah, and Will Eisner is basically, to me, he's like the father of comic books. He was the first person to make comics into a serious medium, to take it seriously, to write really engaging stories, to treat it like a legitimate art form and a means of communication. He was responsible for The Spirit, which was from the dawn of, these are some of like the earliest, well, inset comics that people used to get in the newspapers back in the 1930s and 40s. And during the war, he used to do instructional comics for the army, you know, as a I think it was like a maintenance program or something, and he honed his skills on that and came back, and he was just incredibly good. He was a teacher. He published a lot of books on how to do sequential art, how the medium actually works, the mechanics of it, moving from image to image, and how to make things resonate, how to slow down time, pick it up. All that is extremely important. I just love his stuff. Love his stuff.
I wanted to move on now to your work and this incredible project, because you have a busy full-time career, and we've established that in the legal profession, and then you decide to create your own sideline project and create your own comic called The Merry Boys. What made you decide to do that? And can you give us a detailed background on the premise of the story, the
Sure.
world or the location it's set in, the main characters, and the themes and subjects you explore across the comics?
Sure. Okay. Why did I start doing it? It's a bit weird. I mean, yeah, I've always got stories kicking around in my head. It's a previous. I mean, there's a new era now in creating independent comic books. The crowdfunding era, where you collect money directly from your would-be readers, and you use that to fund yourself printing and distributing your own comic books. So the need for a publisher is basically, it's still nice to have a publisher, but you don't actually need a publisher anymore. If you can advertise it for yourself, you've got a good strong YouTube channel and following, you don't need any of that. It's really liberating. So that's why I've decided to get back into it. I published a graphic novel before with a publisher, and it just I don't know, it didn't perform very well. People didn't really get excited about it. It was just there was too much stuff on the shelf. There was too much going on, and it wasn't my best work either. So I wasn't.
That was Sparko, wasn't it?
That's it. Yeah. So I kind of gave up on comics for a while, until I saw, hey, this is a new way of doing things. And I brushed up my skills. I used to work digitally before, and I started getting really into traditional inking, the way these guys used to work that I always idolized. I thought, why don't I learn from the people that I took it's kind of weird. It's almost counterintuitive. I was influenced by different comics. I was trying to draw differently to the comics that I liked the best, which doesn't make any sense, but that's what I did. So I kind of went back and just taught myself to be better with traditional materials, and started doing my own stuff. Like now on these comics specifically, the Merry Boys are I've got a short elevator sort of pitch that I always mess up somehow. I'll give it a spin now. It is a teenage Knights Templar in a broken Britain, bringing in salvation by force. Basically, they are fighting to eradicate sin from their backwater English town to avoid a biblical apocalypse. So they're almost like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And this cover is a homage to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1. They're teenagers with birth defects. They can't grow hair, because a bit of self-insertion there. They've got cleft lips, big hands, big feet, and they've got their metabolism is a bit strange. So when they drink alcohol, particularly beer, they get stronger and faster, and it's almost like a superpower. They can just take on pretty much anyone. They wield cricket bats. Not these, I've updated. This was like a really early sort of concept drawing that I did. But they wield cricket bats because they're English, obviously. Baseball bats are too American. And they just stalk the night and sort things out as they crop up. They've got they were raised by a Catholic priest who found them at a dumpster. And he's a bit mentally ill. Because he lives in a really bad part of town, like that's where his parish was. So somebody tried to rob him and shot him in the head, and he nearly died. But he had this past life regression of a time where he was a member of the Order of the Knights Templar. So all this knowledge came swarming back into his mind, and he saw, and he started having these visions of what's going to happen to this town if they don't clean it up somehow, you know. And to avoid this biblical apocalypse, he starts training them on how to fight, you know, in Templar formation, strategies, all that kind of stuff. And so from babies, he raises them. And when they became teenagers, they started setting out on their own, taking care of business. that's the basic premise of it. And yeah, it's a very British sort of comic. You know, I really wanted to do a lot of British references. Not that it's not to make it inaccessible to American readers, but I wanted to have something that was true and blue British comics.
It's interesting that you mentioned you're tapping into British themes and British kind of cultural identity. You've got the religious themes going on as well, and I guess an underlying political one where you're saying about it's all set in a broken Britain, and you've also got those references going on to cricket, which is a huge sport, of course, here in the UK, as well as in South Africa as well. And what I really picked up on that I thought was interesting as well, you mentioned we've lived for probably the best part of 2 decades in the digital age, yet you've gone back to the old traditional methods and styles of, you know, doing a comic by hand and, you know, using drawing materials and kind of doing it the kind of long, time consuming and the old way. So it has a distinctive style. I wanted to kind of talk about that kind of creative process. And I wanted to ask you about the process of producing and distributing the work, and roughly how long does it take to write and illustrate an edition of the comic? And how do you go about funding the project, and how much has it costed you so far?
Yeah, so production wise, I mean, to be honest, I don't think it takes that much longer to do it traditionally. I've seen guys take incredibly long doing things digitally, you know, and at the end of the day, you don't have any original art to show for it. So that's kind of where I stand with it. I think also the reason I do it traditionally, another reason is I spend so much time in front of a computer in my day job that the last thing I want to do when I get home is spend more time in front of the PC. You know, that's the reason. So to produce it, I just so the comic books themselves are A4 in size, standard UK format. And what I would do is I will draw them on double the size. So wait, just try a place where I'm not going to be giving anything away, spoiler wise. But yeah, it'll be double the size of this page, so you can get more detail into it. And then it gets shrunken down. I put it into InDesign, and I do the lettering. The lettering isn't traditional. That's still digital. It just makes it much easier to process. And
in terms of the artwork, is everything done sort of freehand with a pencil to start with? Is it? And do you kind of outline with sort of color felt pens? How does shading? How does that kind of work?
I pencil it, and then I will ink over it. I use a brush, and I will use micron pens, but it's all ink. Then you rub out the pencil, and then you'll scan it in. In the new comic, the process is slightly different. I will add some digital toning. Like, you remember, if you read, you know, dot tone, like half tone with the dots and everything.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I'm applying that, but I have to do it digitally because you can't really buy that anymore. And it's a nightmare to apply generally. But so the new comics are going to have a slightly different look, but it's still going to have ink wash, still going to have ink. It's just going to look a bit more layered. Yeah, then that's it. The writing part of it is to me the quickest. I spent, I mean, I knocked the stories out quite quickly. I think in comparison to the drawing just takes forever. But it's mostly because I just don't have that much time. So it's, you know, stolen hours here and there from when I should be sleeping.
I wanted to move on in a moment and talk about the kind of name, your branding name, and also your nickname. But before I do so, have you ever thought about bringing other illustrators on board to work on the comics, or do you solely want it to be just your own creation?
This is almost like an excuse for me to draw. So I'm kind of generating work for myself, and I'm never happy with anybody else's work because I used to, for 1 year, I was working at a publisher in London, and it was for comic books, but it was and I was kind of like I was the art editor there, and I was just incredibly difficult to please. I can just imagine it'll be exactly the same sort of thing. I'm not saying I'm particularly good. I'm just saying that it's got to be just so. So the only way, if I'm going to be working on it, I'd like to do a large part of the drawing myself, if not all. And I'm very selfish. I don't want to give anything away to anybody else.
I can share the same sentiment. I totally get the concept of being a perfectionist and kind of solely wanting to do things creatively your own way. And from my point of view, I find it probably a lot easier. We move on to the premise of the comic. You've given us a detailed background on some of the characters, the themes you explore, and how the comic's produced. I wanted to ask you next, where does the nickname CHUBB come from? And can you tell us why you go under the name Proper PC Comics?
Right. So CHUBB, I was a fat kid. I was a little bit fat. And so out of many of the taunts I received when I was a kid, CHUBB was one of them. And I thought, that doesn't sound that bad. So you kind of own it after a while. And it just kind of stuck. And I think it was a forum name for me for a while. My moniker was Chubby Bunny, because there was this game that American kids played. They would stuff their mouths full of marshmallows, and they have to. And the goal was to see how many. You'd just have to say Chubby Bunny with your mouth full of marshmallows, and I don't know where I came on that, but that was it. And I just shortened it to CHUBB. CHUBB just stuck. And there was another guy who was doing comics, also called Karl, who was Irish. And for some reason, people confuse us. We don't look at all alike. Our comics are completely different, but it happens. So I thought, this is gonna be simple. Just do that. It's memorable. So stick with it. Mary Boys is also. I mean, I found that I've had to explain this to people, but it's almost like because of the Catholic reference, because the Templars are by nature Catholic, or the Catholic priest. So it's. Now the part that I didn't tell you was they have apparitions of the Virgin Mary appear over their targets and lead them into battle. That's another thing. So it's almost like they are followers of Mary Boys. But you also get references to like if you see a football team and it's got a Catholic connection, it's always St. Mary Boys football, whatever, St. Mary Girls, whatever, and it's kind of just shortened. The full name would be St. Mary Boys. But I just cut it off and made it more brief for the sake of the comic.
And the name Proper PC Comics, where did that kind of concept, where did that idea originate from, the name?
Well, I love EC comics. The old Tales of the Crypt that published Jack Davis and everything. They were called EC, which was entertaining comics, and I wanted to have something C, so something like that. And proper is such an English word. It is indisputably English, and it's a mark of quality. So it kind of just came together quite perfectly. I think I kind of like it.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned a love of British comedy and humour, and I wanted to pick up on something on your fundraising page for the Mary Boys comics, which is, you said that the comics and stories represent jet black British comedy. Can you just explain what exactly that is? And can you also tell us about the deliberate look and style, which is obviously illustrated using real media? And you've discussed some of those techniques earlier on.
It's yeah, but like black. It's just dark humor, like League of Gentlemen. You know, it doesn't. It's got a lot of dark topics, but the edge gets taken off because it makes you laugh. That's really that. It's but most British comedy is pretty dark. Okay, not everything post sort of Dad's Army, and I really like Dad's Army, but things like I don't know, Mighty Boosh, I really like Blackadder, Faulty Towers. There was always some sort of edge that I really enjoy so much more than American comedy, and the young ones, obviously, things like that. And I kind of wanted to incorporate that similar sort of feel, that irreverence. Yeah, that's it. British comedy is completely irreverent, and it
In,
kind of
out of curiosity, were those are kind of staple diets of British television and comedy? They're sort of held in such high esteem. But were those programs, were they ever broadcast back in your home country of South Africa? And I also wanted to ask you about the comedy and humour in your own native country. Is it very different to the sort of British comedy sensibility?
Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, we got it when we it was broadcasted when I was a kid. So that's why I latched onto it first. I just instantly fell in love with it. Afrikaans humor is different. It is we don't have, I mean, there are comedy shows, but they're terrible. The best Afrikaans comedy are basically stories. You get there was a few shows where you would get a comedian on and he would just tell. It's a different style of comedy where you didn't have like the punchline was probably the least important part of the entire joke. It was about how it's told, mannerisms, the demeanor of the teller. Very different sort of mindset. I appreciate it just as much. It just isn't that much of it around. That's all. It isn't as universally known as British comedy.
And from a sort of worldwide perspective, particularly your own one, from moving to your home country to the UK, what would you say for you are the big major cultural differences? And do you feel that both cultures have influenced your own work within the comics, whether that be the storytelling, the themes of, has sort of British culture as well as South African culture influenced that kind of whole creative project for you?
I don't know. It's a good question. Nobody's asked me that before. Is there any South Africanisms in Mary Boys? I don't know. Honestly, I don't. Maybe somebody reading it, like would have picked up on something. Because sometimes, I still do a lot of South Africanisms. I'll use phrases and things that people say, what are you talking about? I'll say, but this. Then they'll say, no, that's a South Africanism. That's something you say down there. It's not something we say up here. It doesn't mean anything up here. So maybe there is something in there like that. But there aren't any for comic books. I mean, yeah. Well, first of all, there aren't really comic books, South African comic books around. There's cartoons, newspaper gags, stuff like that. But there isn't, graphic novels and stories as such. It's never really picked up. We've always looked towards the British and the Americans for that. And the stories, the novels, yeah, it's a totally different mindset. Very, very different culturally, I think.
I'd now like to kind of digress and talk about the overall reaction to the Indiegogo campaigns. How much money have you received so far? And what's the reaction been from comic enthusiasts? And how do you go about publicizing the campaigns and the promotion for the actual comic books themselves?
The reaction's been very good. On the first campaign, we had about 570 backers, I think, which is good and which is bad for just publishing a comic and selling it, but it's really good for people, a good number where it comes to people backing. And I think it raised about £15,000. And this one has also raised, the new book that I'm busy with now has also raised a similar amount. So yeah, it's not bad. It's doing all right. Getting the word around, that's the hardest bit, actually. It's all about networking. Like I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. We've got a group. We post things in comic book groups. There are comic book podcasts and shows on YouTube that we appear on. We've got our own videos that we do to publicize what we're doing. Yeah, it's a process. That's the difficult bit. And then once we fulfill, we just post it straight out to backers. There's no distribution system or anything like that. Maybe one day there will be something, but right now it's just DIY from us to our readers with nobody else involved.
It was mentioned earlier on, one slight disappointment in your kind of comic book and graphic novel journey, and that was creating your own graphic novel, which was published, and we mentioned the name, it was called Sparko. Can you tell us a little bit about the premise of the novel? And despite your disappointment with the kind of finished result of that, and obviously I think you said sales wise as well, do you have any intentions to produce another?
Another one, like a follow-up to Sparko? No, I don't think so. I think it was a good learning experience, but yeah, I don't know. I'm glad I did it. The premise of the story was basically of a guy lost in London who falls into a nether world. He's does a lot of drugs, and he's got massive personal problems. And at some point, he runs into a problem with a drug dealer. He gets stabbed, and he falls into the river, into the Thames River. And when he comes out, somehow he survives this, and when he emerges from the river, he finds he's in almost like an alternate reality, and he gets strung along onto a mad adventure trying to find a MacGuffin, this magic decor that is being that some dark force is trying to get its hands on, and he befriends this girl on a scooter who takes him on this weird adventure through the bowels of London to it's a long story, but it's not as bad as it sounds. It's actually okay, but yeah, the art could be better. And yeah,
to be honest, Karl, you sold it pretty well, because I want to read it after you telling me that premise. It sounds pretty surreal, and yeah, I'd like to give Sparko a go for definite. Move back to Merry Boys, and do you have any long-term plans with the comics and the ongoing fundraising campaigns? And how do you intend to develop the stories and the characters? And have you been approached by any publishers?
No, I haven't been approached. The plan is just to carry on self-publishing. That's all. Basically, yeah. I mean, I think I'd like to keep control of what I do now. I've just gotten used to it now. I don't think I'd like to relinquish that control to a publisher anyway, because I find that my experience has been that nobody promotes your book as well as you do. Nobody knows your book as well as you do. Nobody's going to go out on a limb in the same way as you will in promoting your stuff. The stories, well, the first two books are the origin story, and the one I'm doing now is a collection of short stories with the same characters in the same world. So kind of, it's just vignettes of their life, and just some are high octane adventures, other are a bit more stoic sort of scenarios. After that, I might do another collection, or I might do more of a long form story. Like I have them already, but I'm just going to decide on what to do, or I might do something different just to break it all, because I really want to do a horror comic. So I'll see what I do. I'll see where the interest lies with the readers, if they want a horror comic now, if they want another installment. So it depends, because after I did the first comic, and it got a really good reaction, there were loads of people who were taking it upon themselves to do review videos of it, and they were very happy with it, and I got a lot of sales off the back of that, and that kind of gave me like a new boost of interest in comics. So we'll see how this new collection fares, and see where we go from there. But there are a lot of stories to be told with these characters. They're kind of written in a way that gives them a lot of gears. If they can be short. It's almost like you can do just to use music as an analogy. They can be short, punchy punk songs. Short, funny, action-driven stories. or there can be long form stories from the perspective of older people, like the priest parish, younger kids like the boys, people facing their twilight years versus people just emerging and, you know, getting to know the world, dealing with their preconceived notions about the world. There's a lot of scope for writing stories with these characters, and I have lots and lots of ideas. So they're not going to go away anytime soon.
We watch this space in regards to the way the Merry Boys comics develops over time, and maybe there will be a follow-up horror comic book. I hope to see that as well. That sounds really interesting. You've spoken about self-publishing and having sole creative control. My question was, have you ever thought about turning the Merry Boys comics or another of your creations into maybe an animated TV series, perhaps a short film, or maybe even a feature movie?
I've had somebody approach me to do a stop motion thing with them, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, because I know stop motion takes incredibly long, and you know, it's going to have to be kid friendly and all that. This is more of a sort of gritty thing, gritty indie comic. So if I could pick a director to do a movie or a TV series, I would get Terry Gilliam of Monty Python.
A really excellent choice. I think Terry Gilliam is a very underrated and underappreciated. I class him as more of an artist than just solely a filmmaker. And I think the sad thing with Terry Gilliam, he's had so many unfortunate experiences in the film industry over the course of his career. Problems with studio backing, films being funded, but it's a great choice. Of course, Monty Python background as well.
Yeah, he's an absolute genius. I mean, because he can capture the fantastical, you know, and the everyday. You know, he's very good at melding those two things together. And this is exactly what my comic is. It's set in a very real sort of world, but it's got a fantastical element, but it's kind of underplayed. It's just he's really good at gelling those two things together. And the other, well, if I couldn't get him, I would get the guy who did This Is England. That's the movie.
That's
what is his name?
The guy who did the Stone Roses documentary, British filmmaker, and it's gone out of my head. I can see him now. I can always never. Yeah, I know the guy you mean. Yes, they did the TV series as well. Yeah.
Google him, but everybody knows who we mean. But that sort of thing, that sort of character-driven sort of TV series would be good too. Because I mean, it's really low tech, my stuff. I mean, you wouldn't need that many special effects or whatever to be able to do that. It's almost like an episode of Shameless. You know.
As a move on to the next question, the name does come to mind. Shane Meadows.
Shane Meadows, there we go. Yeah.
I want to come back to film as a medium shortly. And my final question is related to cinema, because I want to hear your take on comic books being transferred into films, and this kind of, it's almost become a fad and a fashion and a current trend that's been so popular for a long time. But before I do that, I just simply wanted to ask you, outside of your busy working life, and of course the Merry Boys project, what are your other interests and hobbies?
Don't have time. Sleeping.
Just making comics, yeah.
Yeah, being a dad. If I've got time, I train, just fitness training, just try and avoid getting a heart attack. And if I get time other than making art and doing the job, then I try and spend time with my family.
How many children do you have? And out of interest, what's their perspective on the comics, your love of creativity, and are they creative themselves, and have they kind of tapped into your love of collecting, reading comics and producing them?
Yeah, I've got a 5-year-old boy. And yeah, I don't know. I bought him about 500 Beano comics because I wanted to encourage his reading, and he loves those. And he looks over my shoulder and he asks me to draw like Iron Man because he loves Iron Man. And yeah, he's too young. I think he's too young to articulate his perspective on it. But I think he sees it as something interesting that Dad does from time to time. You know, I don't think So yeah, and he's starting to draw a little bit himself, and yeah, you know, I guess he likes it.
Karl, shortly we come on to the final set of questions. And these are questions designed to ask every single Your Take guest. We ask them the same 13 questions. They're quick fire questions to find out things maybe we didn't establish over the course of the interview about them, their career, their life journey, maybe things they're not so keen on, their passions. And we'll ask those questions shortly. But as I mentioned, I wanted to ask your take on cinema. We can move back to the medium, which we mentioned a few times, and we spoke about the filmmaker Terry Gilliam and the hopes of maybe him or Shane Meadows making a version of one of your creations. And I have to say, Gilliam is a great choice, and Brazil remains one of my favorite films. But we know that cinema goes through cycles, particularly Hollywood, where certain things become fashionable, trends and cycles. There's nothing new or original about comic books being made into films. It's been going on ever since the evolution of cinema, even back to the silent days. Mm-hmm. But of course, with the Marvel and DC franchise, probably over the course of the last decade, we've been saturated by these films. What is your take on their mainstream popularity, and what is your actual overall take on the films? Have you enjoyed the adaptations, and do you think they are faithful to the original comics? And I wanted to specifically ask you that because you are such a huge comic book enthusiast.
I'd say The Crow is probably the best adaptation, what's correct, that I've seen. Yeah, it depends. I haven't watched that many, to be honest with you. I've recently, especially because of this oversaturation, you just see it everywhere, and they're out faster than you can pay attention to them or to consider if you even want to see them. I would say I like the first Iron Man movie. I like the second reboot of Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield.
It was.
That was pretty good, I thought. I actually thought the first Daredevil movie wasn't bad. Apparently the TV series that's for Netflix is quite good. I've got it. It's on my shelf. Had no time to watch it, but I'll get around to it. I've heard Doom Patrol is quite good as a series. Haven't had time to watch it. We'll watch it one day. It's in the back of my mind somewhere. I haven't watched the Avengers, any of the Avengers stuff. I like the first Christian Bale Batman. I thought that was pretty cool. The best Batman adaptation was the 1989 Tim Burton one, and close on its heels was the 1992 Batman Returns, also by Tim Burton. Those two are great, absolutely perfect Batman movies.
Several well-known filmmakers have come out and commented on their disapproval about comic book films. Martin Scorsese, a key figure. I think Francis Ford Coppola. Do you think that's just a form of snobbery, or do you think they've got, a point that we've just become oversaturated with the same thing time and time again? And they're also kind of, to me, they seem quite designed at a teenage audience. And do you think the comics, when they actually came out at the time, were they specifically aimed at the same target audience then?
It depends. I mean, we're talking about the mainstream comics. Then, yeah, that was aimed at kids. And to be honest with you, the mainstream comics are still pretty much written for kids. You see a lot of adults reading them, but they're written for kids. They've got the same reading level and reading comprehension and maturity than your average teenager. They aren't really for adults. I don't care who says what. The Vertigo comics There was a lot of comics. They're doing the Netflix series on it now, the Sandman comics, and there was like a new trend where they did start making it more adult themed, and there was a bit more depth to it. That was a break from it, and the British comics 2080 kind of grew with its audience. It started out for kids, and then moved away and got a lot more interesting as it carried on before the Americans poached them to go work on this line of Vertigo comics. And of course, the Europeans are leagues ahead of everybody else when it comes to, to graphic novels as an art form. They even call it the ninth art. So what was your original question? I just keep trailing off there.
Yeah, it was mainly about the film, some of the key filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola. I think there's been several others that have made the comment that they're almost like a theme park ride was Scorsese's description. And
I did agree. Yeah, but isn't that what you sign up for? Because if I go watch a Spider-Man movie, he starts lamenting about existential themes, and I'm not going to want to see that. I'm going to expect Spider-Man the way I read it in the comic books. I can't think of. It is basically what it is. It's pop culture. It's not there to replace anything else. It's fun. It's meant to be fun. And when it starts getting a little bit too close to real life, it's escapism. If you start bringing real life into it too much, people kind of go, I've been dealing with this all week on the news, and I just wanted to watch a Spider-Man movie. Yeah, So that's a score. But Scorsese, of course, that's a totally different world, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. You can't compare. If you want to go and watch a seminal film or something that's held as a masterpiece, go and watch something like, Bergman or Orson Welles or Stanley Kubrick. Like you say, it says what it is on the tin, isn't it? It's like, yeah.
The closest thing was
Joker. Entertaining.
Yeah, it was like Joker. They did a movie that was actually, I thought, was quite close to King of Comedy and Taxi Driver. That was basically an amalgamation of those two movies, and it worked. But that isn't your typical comic book fare. That was interesting. I thought I kind of like that. And I'd love to see. Did you watch the Joker movie?
I did, yeah. And like you say, it's very much influenced by a lot of the key films in the 70s. There's some nods to Network, which is a film about a television host who wants to commit suicide on air. There's the King of Comedy reference, Taxi Driver. There's all sorts of things going on in that film.
I'd love to see a Batman in that that's paired with that Joker. Whether that Batman would exist outside of the Joker's mind is, of course, another story. But you can get really, you can make you can use it for something quite interesting, I think. But then it's no longer for kids. Then the real target audience are never going to get to see that movie because the age rating is going to be too high for them to watch it in the cinema. Is cinema even a thing anymore? I mean, I don't know when last you went to the cinema, but it's empty. There's nobody going anymore now. Everybody streams stuff, and I don't know.
The technological change with film. We're going to move on now to the final questions we ask all the Your Take guests to take part in, just to kind of wrap up the interview. You don't have to think of these in any detail. They're just quick fire questions. So here we go, Karl Stephan. These are the final questions. Always get some interesting answers to these. Number one, what would you say is your favorite pastime?
Drawing.
I thought you might say that one. We've spoken about films, and of course it was a topic in our last conversation, and we cited some very interesting filmmakers over the course of the last hour. But what is your favorite film and why?
Fight Club. It is funny it is good on lots of different levels. It is actually a work of philosophy while simultaneously being a really good thriller.
Good choice. And I do like David Fincher. I think he's one of the great sort of American modern day filmmakers. We talk novels now. Who would you cite as your favorite novelist?
A guy called He said it's Goreshi. He did a series of stories called Don Camillo, which was of an Italian priest in post-war Italy, and they're great. They are very slice of life stuff. Really recommended.
A comic book creator,
Giovanni Goreshi. That's his name.
A comic book creator, of course, and working in the legal profession. But if you could have had a different profession, what would it have been?
Oh, good one. Still trying to figure that out. I guess I don't know. I guess if it was possible to do comics full time, I guess I'd do that. Storyboarding maybe, because that's very close to
indeed.
It involves stories and drawing. So yeah, maybe that.
Who would you cite in life as your greatest inspiration?
That's a good one. I don't know. My father, possibly.
Why would you choose your father?
Very strong man. I mean, strong in here. Made it through a lot, and never backward.
Still alive today?
No.
Was that long ago? Sorry to.
Oh, it was quite a long time ago. Yeah.
Right.
No, he died of cancer. This was 2000. Yeah, just about 2000.
And was he creative like yourself?
No, completely
different.
Yeah. Very different people.
Next, we move from inspirations in life to newspapers, the press. Mm-hmm. Do you read a newspaper? If so, which one?
I don't stick to any particular newspaper. In fact, I try and get different takes because obviously everybody's biased. So it's weird. I probably oscillate between Daily Express, possibly. If there's something in the Guardian that's informative, I will read that. If there's something in the Daily Mail that's informative, I'll read that. So it kind of, no set sort of newspaper. I don't trust anybody to give me a completely unbiased version of the truth.
I agree on that note. If you get any spare time, do you like cooking? But also, what would you say is your favorite food?
Okay. I love fish. Yeah, seafood. Love that. Calamari rings and nice cod. I don't make it myself, but I do love cooking. Yeah, I do. Some South African dishes I really enjoy. Sometimes when our family's over, then I cook bobotie for them.
What's that?
It's like it's like almost a curry sort of dish. It's actually Malay in origin, but we kind of adopted it in South Africa. It is chutney, curry powder with mince, eggs, all sorts of things, and it's served with rice and bay leaves and coconut on top. It's great.
Who next would you say is your favorite cultural icon? A lot of our previous guests have come a little bit unstuck on this one, but it could be an important figure from history. It could be maybe a political leader, someone who's transformed the world in a certain way by the invention of something or building something. I've
got an admiration for Churchill. I think. I don't think he was always, he's not I wouldn't say he's he was not always nice in what he did. Obviously he left the Soviets to basically take Poland after it fought so gallantly to defend Britain, but you gotta admire that sort of adversity. You gotta, I think Churchill would be a big cultural icon, I would think.
He certainly is a big cultural icon, and he's always revered as one of the most important Britons. And I think whatever your politics, whether you're, not that it matters to the left or to the right, when you hear some of those wartime speeches in Parliament, the oratory, the words, they do kind of bring a sense of emotion, whether you're patriotic or not patriotic or whatever your persuasions are, I think they are quite stirring speeches. And when you hear them, they do, for me, they do set off a sense of emotion.
Yeah, no, very much.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, even though South Africa obviously fought a war with Britain, and Churchill was actually involved in that war against South Africa, and he was captured and managed to escape. You know, so yeah, it's like that. But that's the universe. That's the populism. That's the relatability of the World War. He was on the right side of that war. You know, and united the nation. It's admirable. But he still managed to lose the election to. He was the prime minister directly after the Labour one. I forget. It was Clarence.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Conservatives lose that election after the war, post-war, and yet the next Clement Attlee comes in as but he's often regarded as one of the best prime ministers that this country's ever had for changing Britain in such difficult economic circumstances and creating the welfare state and the NHS. And yet, ironically, he loses the election after that. So, yeah, almost, yeah, it's an interesting phase of history. From Winston Churchill and Clement Attlee to very important British prime ministers, we move on next to curse words. What is your favourite curse word and why?
I guess it's probably Afrikaans curse word that if I stub my toe, I still revert to the old Afrikaans curse words because they're ingrained in me. They're a lot more. So it'll be. I don't want to say it because it has actually got a bit of impact, you know, to me, and it's not polite. But it's weird because those are the words you definitely did not say. Those are the words you will not hear on TV. Whereas English curse words. Or American English curse words you would hear all the time everywhere because, you know, they are everywhere.
You've done a fair amount of traveling in your lifetime and experienced very different cultures. But what would you say is your favorite place or holiday destination?
My favorite place is Bristol, definitely,
Yeah.
without a shadow of a doubt. And I'm fortunate to live here. It's a lovely city, lovely people. It's got a bit of everything. We spent about 10 years in London, and you know, just in the comparison between the two, you've actually got a bit of space. It's got the culture. It's got everything that you want. It's got greenery. It's got culture. It's got everything, a bit of everything. Holiday wise, okay, I don't take holidays, but we did go to we took a holiday to Krakow a while back, which I really loved. Lots of old culture. You know, I love Eastern Europe in general, and holidays there are always great. And if I'm going to take something that's a bit more, you know, typical, I would say, yeah, Gran Canaria wasn't bad. You know, wandering around in that massive volcano.
Yeah, I share an interest in Eastern Europe like yourself. I think because I find the history of it so fascinating, particularly the war and post-war, and how it was obviously broken up after the fall and obviously the emergence of communism a lot of it was occupied by Soviet Russia. So I find, like you, Eastern Europe and how it's developed since the fall of the war, the Berlin Wall and the Cold War. I find it such a fascinating part of history, and I find those countries very interesting.
Yeah, I find the people very interesting too. I mean, we grew up relatively in the same kind of atmosphere in a way. You know, we were just on opposite sides of the Iron Curtain.
With apartheid, you mean?
Yeah. Because I mean, you know, media was restricted. We had strong Calvinism. They had communism, but it was kind of the same thing in keeping people in place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and rebellion was we rebelled in the same. We even had the same sort of programming on TV. It was surprising to me how much programming was bought from the Soviet Union and rebroadcast in South Africa. It was a bit odd.
And was a lot of that propaganda then?
Not propaganda, no, kids shows and things like that. No, the propaganda. That's it. Yeah, that would have been a bit weird. but we it kind of raised, we had, there's a commonality there that I did not expect to find.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. We move from places and holiday destinations next to music. Who is your favorite music artist and what is your favorite album?
Only one, oh dear, because I love a lot.
You
There's
could
so much.
choose a few's fine, honestly.
Okay,
I could never choose one.
yeah, I'll choose. Okay, so punk. I would say my favorite punk album is Walk Among Us by the Misfits. Favorite electro industrial album would be Skinny Puppy, Two Dark Park. Favorite metal album or black metal album would be Burzum, Philosopher. Let's see. I really love Black Sabbath. Pretty much the first 6 albums of Black Sabbath were amazing. There's a lot. There's really a lot, and then it's everything outside those spheres. There's it's hard. It's difficult. That's the hardest question.
Karl, we move on to the final 2 now. First one, number 1. What is your greatest achievement to date?
My son.
Nice answer. And then the last one. How do you wish to be remembered?
Yeah, it's a good question. Nice guy. Who made okay comic books and a great dad.
That is the end of tonight's Your Take interview. Thank you for taking part. I should mention as well that we had this scheduled for a couple of days ago, and my fault, but the technology played up on us with the fault of Virgin as my provider, and we had some issues. So thank you for your patience, and it's been a really interesting story, because it's incorporated so many things. I feel I've learned a lot about an area I wasn't maybe particularly knowledgeable on in terms of comics. I know some things, obviously, and I've seen a lot of comic book films and some of the animations, Marvel ones I loved as a kid. It's also been interesting you talking about the techniques, the styles you use, your creative influences, and you cited many names during the interview. And we've spoken about all sorts of things, cultural differences. We've spoken a little bit about political things as well, differences, subcultures, themes. It's really been an interesting hour. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you for taking part. And lastly, I wish you all the very best, whatever your endeavors are with the Mary Boys or your planned horror project, if that ever comes off. But how do we find out more? How do we get involved with the campaigns? How do you maybe donate money to the campaign or purchase the comic? Can you just give us some further information?
The project is on Indiegogo, and you can buy the old comics and the new ones on there as perks. Can you leave a link in the description below in the video?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
that's the best way. And there's a Facebook group of Mary Boys if you want to stay up to date. But I post regular updates and things on the actual Indiegogo page. It's indiegogo.com, and if you Google Mary Boys, it'll come up. But yeah, if we can post a link to it, then that'll make it easier to find.
Yeah, by all means. And lastly, again, I wish you all the very best creatively, in your personal life, your career as well, your day-to-day work and everything you do. And thanks again for taking part on Your Take.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. Cheers. Bye.